When an Israeli military commando attacked the Gaza-bound flotilla in May 2010, it brought to the attention of the international community the illegal siege of Gaza. Many organizations, such as the Palestine Legal Fund, fight to break that siege. We are here today in the Justice for Palestine fundraiser to speak to some of the experts and supporters about the legal issues that Palestinians and their supporters face.
There's settlement building in East Jerusalem and everywhere else on the West Bank. There are acts of violence every day by the Israeli armed forces. There's interventions in their whole range of their human rights. Of course, there's the wall, the illegal wall built in the West Bank, which makes it impossible for families to live anywhere near the wall, to live any kind of normal existence, have access to their own lands. And then, of course, there's the siege of Gaza and the terrible humanitarian disaster that's been happening there.
The object of the Palestine Legal Aid Fund, as the title suggests, is to provide resources, mainly financial, for those people in Palestine, but also others outside, who wish to take legal action to seek redress for all the iniquities that the Palestinian people have suffered at the hands of the Israeli state over the last 40 years or more. Criminal actions, civil actions.
Essentially, there are incredible international lawyers around the world that want to represent Palestinian rights, all human rights really, in courts, but they don't have the funding to do that. So what we do is provide them with that essential support to make it sustainable, because we as a movement are not looking to bring one or two cases. I mean, we are looking for something sustainable that will lead to a long-term change in Israeli illegal policies.
I can now welcome the co-founder and director of the Palestine Legal Aid Fund, Rashad Yaqub. Welcome to Remember Palestine, Rashad.
Thank you, Lauren.
So the Palestine Legal Fund, it sounds like you're going to have a huge amount on your plate from the beginning, but also strange that something so simple hasn't been thought of 63 years ago?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think when the research was done in terms of defining the corporate structure, obviously one looks for a precedent. And what was shocking is the fact that the Palestinians, despite having one of the greatest breaches of international law and having suffered some of the greatest contraventions of international law, did not have a simple professional institution to represent them from a legal perspective.
Now, the problem with all of this, of course, as we all know, is getting legal help is expensive, let alone if you're bouncing it up to somewhere like The Hague or the EU. How on earth are you going to cope with raising funds, and how much do you need?
Well, I mean, it's how long is a piece of string?
Yeah.
But looking at precedents, there are some precedents. And during the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, a permanent legal aid fund was established in London in the 60s. They raised over £100 million, and they fought cases which affected over 28,000 South Africans. And one could actually argue that had it not been for this legal fund and the legal defence, Mandela would not have been released, and he would not have gone on to basically lead the world against the anti-apartheid regime. So it's been done before, it was successful as a precedent, and it is something which we firmly believe can be achieved for the Palestinians.
So just 100 million then, you're not, shoot for the stars. What sort of cases are you dealing with? What specific areas?
Well, the range of cases vary incredibly. What we basically look at doing, especially in the first stages of the fund, is to obviously use the limited resources that we're able to raise with maximum impact. So just to give you a couple of examples, I mean, the three areas that we're focusing on currently. Number one, as a result of the recent flotilla disaster, that opened up suddenly a very interesting opportunity for lawyers to get stuck in. You had hundreds of people from Western countries as well as from Palestine.
Let me just remind viewers that the property on board those ships, for example, has not been returned, estimated in millions of pounds in laptops and phones and cash.
Yeah. As well as the fact that 9 people were killed in cold blood by Israeli commandos. So that crime, whether it's murder, whether it's a war crime, whether it's this gave an opportunity to bring the bigger picture, which is obviously the siege of Gaza, into the international picture, and allow, because the individuals who were killed as well as those who witnessed the events came from other countries, it allowed those other countries, using concepts of universal jurisdiction, to suddenly engage in the process of bringing Israeli accountability. That process requires a number of stages: witness evidence gathering across so many different jurisdictions, sifting through which jurisdictions offer you a universal jurisdiction mechanism, filing ICC complaints using host countries, assessing where the boats came from in terms of identifying in naval waters which country can actually bring a case because it's to do with whether that particular vessel is owned or registered or where the flag is. Lots of legal issues were suddenly thrown up, and lots of opportunities were given to actually focus on bringing serious accountability to Israel through that.
You've touched on there the internationality of this cause and using different governments with their own laws to question the actions against individuals. Are you suggesting that you're going to be an umbrella, or trying to form an umbrella association where people can come? Because if a Spanish group is working on looking for flotilla rights, and another person's looking for the siege, there's no umbrella society. Are you going to be that?
I mean, rather than being an umbrella society, we're slightly more focused. What we basically want to do is move from academic analysis, legal academic analysis, conferences, seminars and so on, which is great, moving that into a phase of direct enforcement. Okay, what does that mean? It means principally two things. Number one, raising the cash and the resources to be able to then hire the best legal minds globally to bring serious accountability in real courts of law. So that phase and that mindset means the Palestinian struggle is no longer limited to purely a political or humanitarian response to Israeli aggression, but actually there is a dedicated team of expertise available to the NGOs, to victims more importantly, where in terms of accessing lawyers, accessing resources to hire lawyers, there is a full-time permanent body available to do that.
And of course what's interesting is because Palestine isn't a state, they've had no kind of statehood-related laws on the international stage, which has really taken away people's rights. Exiled people from 1948 and 67, could they come to you and say, what about my home, what about the right of return?
Well, absolutely. I think a lot of these issues would get to a point of a political statement by the United Nations. Right. I mean, the right of return, for example, or the rights of those occupied territories under 1967 are all clearly enshrined in resolution after resolution at the UN level. The Goldstone Report, the UN fact-finding mission. The question is, what happens next? How do you take that evolution in political thought, evolution even in legislation? The International Court of Justice is there, the ICC has now been developed over the last 20 years. How do you take those opportunities and mechanisms and actually make it work for the Palestinians in terms of getting their day in court? There's a number of steps which need to be taken.
Okay. We need to wrap up there, but have you got a website set up where people can look at your work?
Yeah, so if you go to www.humanrightsfund.org, all of the information is available on there.
Thank you very much, Rasha.
Great, thank you.
Now, if you want to leave your comments about what's been discussed on today's Remember Palestine, here's how to get in touch.